Money Stop Mafia, we made it. Speed Weeks 2025 is finally here. It's your fifth season of NASCAR's most important betting stop of the day, presented by SpeedFreaks and Kicking the Tires. He's Cole Cusumano. I'm Steven Cusumano, coming out of the Clash, coming out of Super Bowl Sunday. That can only mean one thing, Cole, and that is that the greatest event in motorsports and in probably all of sports is upon us. It is right in front of us. You're going to be there in person. The Daytona 500 vibes are here with us right now. It feels amazing for me. I can't imagine how amazing it feels for you.
The electricity right now is off the charts. I am absolutely buzzing. I got a flight at 6 a.m. tomorrow, which will be the 12th. I'll be landing and going straight to the track into qualifying. So I cannot even put into words how pumped up I am right now. I feel like a little kid again that got into this sport back in 2008, and I just cannot wait to get down there to Daytona Beach, Florida, and see who gets to hoist that Harley J. Earl trophy. It's going to be freaking awesome.
That's got to be cool flying into Daytona, too. The other times I've been there, I either drove there from Tampa or Orlando. I feel like it's got to feel even different when you're flying into Daytona Airport, right next to the track.
Oh, just getting that aerial view of the track is going to be incredible. I'm sure I'm going to get a bunch of big, like, Days of Thunder vibes, Cole Trickle vibes, so bring it on. I'm super pumped up, got a badass playlist going. I'll be working on the plane through the flight all the way up to, I guess, once qualifying ends tomorrow, so it's going to be an awesome time.
So NASCAR makes its way from Bowman Gray Stadium in Winston-Salem, North Carolina to Daytona. Let's talk about the Clash for a minute here. Chase Elliott dominated. Do you read anything into this for betting purposes? For, I think, Hendrick Motorsport, Chase Elliott fans, it was a really fun race to watch. I enjoyed the product of this Clash, I would say, more than any that were at the Coliseum. But I guess from a betting sense, do you take anything from what we saw last week?
You know, I think I do. It's hard to really apply any of this to Daytona, going from a quarter-mile track to a track that's over 2 miles long. But I think just in the broad scope of things, to start the year off, we saw last year, actually, Chase Elliott was one of my picks I thought that could win the 500. He had an exceptional race. He's always been a great drafting track racer. And I think this is going to set him up for a really successful first stint of the 2025 season. I mean, the entirety of last year, he had one of the most consistent runs by far. He had the best average finish through all 36 races, finally got back in the win column, and I think this is only going to help them, gain more confidence and gain more, just a bigger boost going into this season. I think they're going to have a really good shot at their first 500 this weekend in Daytona.
Well, we've got a lot to cover here. This will be a little bit more of a traditional episode where if you listen to our first sort of a bonus episode, preseason episode, a little more recapping of the silly season. We'll like to do a little bit of splash and go where we glaze over the storylines that are, have taken place since we last spoke, but obviously nothing's happened. This is the first points race of the season. A lot of exciting stuff happening. So let's dig into it here. Let's take it to the bank as we look at our odds per BetMGM pre-qualifying for the Daytona 500. You've got co-favorites there, all blue ovals. Ryan Blaney, Joey Logano, Brad Keselowski, all plus 1,200 to win the 500. Kyle Busch, very heavily favored by the sports books. I think he actually is the favorite on FanDuel, but on BetMGM, he's plus 1,400. And then Denny Hamlin, Mr. Daytona 500 himself, is plus 1,500 to round out the top five. So without further ado, just for any new listeners or viewers that wonder how the show works, we do this in tiers. We'll each give two of our favorites, two of our sleepers, and two of our favorite value picks of the week. So without further ado, Cole, why don't you kick us off with a couple of favorites this week?
Yeah, I mean, so first off, I think the big thing whenever you're betting drafting tracks is to go with your gut. We preach to go with your gut every single week, but especially when you go to these tracks where a lot is very much out of the driver's control. And for the 500 specifically, I think an even bigger factor to consider when betting is who you can envision hoisting that Harley J. Earl trophy. And for me, last year, I really didn't have a strong feeling one way or another, even leading up to the green flag. But this year, I had this vision almost immediately after the Clash. I really do think this is going to be Ryan Blaney's 500 to win. He is renowned as one of the greatest drafting track racers in the sport right now. He is the favorite across many of the sports books going into this race before qualifying and practice hit the track. and for great reason. I mean, he won at Daytona in 2021. He is a 4-time drafting track winner. And I think the big thing for me is just seeing how he performed in the Clash. And again, I know there's no correlation to, competing well at a quarter-mile track to a track like Daytona, but this is a guy that took the provisional, started dead last at a track where passing was very difficult to do, and he rallied to finish second. And he gave Chase Elliott a really good shot at that win there in the closing stages. But just looking at this thing, going back to last year, obviously he experienced a lot of heartbreak, was not able to go back-to-back in the championships, but he finished runner-up to Joey Logano. And going back to 2024, including the Clash, he now has 4 straight top 2 finishes. And I think that heartbreak is only going to fuel him even more so into this 500. The only caveat is that he has not placed above 29th in his last 3 Daytona starts, but what that tells me is that Ryan Blaney is very much due for a great run, and I think it's going to end with him hoisting that Harley J. Earl Trophy come Sunday evening. So I like Ryan Blaney a lot. I think one thing that we've seen since the inception of the next-gen cars, that these blue ovals, the Fords, have been the cream of the crop at these drafting tracks. The body style is just so, I guess, catered to that style of racing, and it also helps that all those drivers in the blue ovals, your Brad Keselowski's, your Ryan Blaney's, Joey Logano's, they are among the best of the best on those style tracks. So for that, I've got to go with Ryan Blaney. Once again, he is plus $1,200 for the race win, and only $9,700 for daily fantasy purposes. Now, for my second driver, I'm going to go with one of those names I also just mentioned in Brad Keselowski, who is seeking his first Daytona 500 win in his 16th attempt. Time is running out for him. It's a win he's been searching for a long, long time. And I think what we saw last year from Brad Keselowski was a really encouraging sign. He finally got back in the win column with that Southern 500 win. He still is competing at the top of his game on these style tracks. He was like feet away from winning the Talladega spring race before he got taken out by Michael McDowell. So the competitiveness is definitely there, especially on these style tracks. But I think when we think about Daytona and Talladega and now Atlanta, while there is a lot out of your control, there are certain drivers like your Brad Keselowski's who just have a knack for mastering this style of racing. It's very much an art form, and it's a race where a lot's out of your control, but for guys like Brad Keselowski especially, this is one where it can be in your control, and it's just a matter of, I guess, pulling back the reins a little bit, because the thing that we've seen with Brad Keselowski is that he's come so close in those final stages of the race, and he'll get too aggressive and take himself out or whatever. That's something that prevents him from getting that win. So it's just a matter of him pulling back the reins a little bit and being cautiously calculated with his moves. So irregardless, Brad Keselowski is always going to be a great pick and a safe pick for a drafting track win. I would love to see him get his first 500 win. Again, it's going to be his 16th attempt. He's up there in age now, almost 40 years old. So why not Brad Keselowski? Last year, he, again, was feet away from winning at Talladega. He's won at Daytona before. He's a 7-time drafting track winner. He actually finished runner-up in both Talladega races last year, finished 8th in the summer Daytona race, so the only outlier was the 500, where he was also, once again, very, very close in the final laps of that race. So another thing I wanted to point out with Brad Keselowski is back with Jeremy Bullins top the pit box. They won 5 races together in the Cup Series, including once at Talladega. And Jeremy Bullins, he himself is a Daytona 500 champion with Austin Cindric back in 2022, and he also won with Harrison Burton last year in the summer race. So I think there's a lot of good things going for Brad Keselowski, obviously, a lot of great things going for Ryan Blaney as well, and a lot of good things going in general for the Blue Ovals for this 500.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, because that's something that definitely needs to be front of mind, is that the Fords are consistently always the best drafting cars at Daytona and Talladega. So there's a reason why the Fords are so heavily favored this week. But for the sake of keeping this a little bit different between my predictions, your predictions, I'll pick 2 favorites that are not Fords, and I'll pick 2 from actually different manufacturers. And I'll start with Denny Hamlin, because like I mentioned, there was a little while there where it felt like he couldn't lose a Daytona 500. He won it in 2016, won it again in 2019, and then in 2020, a race I was there at in the grandstands. And he hasn't won at Daytona since then. Matter of fact, the last 6 races for Denny, he's not even finished inside the top 10 at Daytona. So what that tells me is that he's due, because it feels like Denny is one of those drivers that is always there at the end. Obviously, The exception to that has been the last several years, including the last Daytona race that they ran in the fall. But Denny seems to just have a knack for finding his way through trouble. He's got great allies in the field. He knows how to win at this track, win consistently. And thinking about that stretch that he had between 2017 through 2020, he had a top 3 finish. It's actually a top 5 finish in 4 out of 5 Daytona races from 2019 to 2020. So we know he can do it consistently. He is one of the most sure bets that there is in the field. And I look for, if anyone's going to be carrying the flag for the Toyotas, for Joe Gibbs Racing, obviously it's going to be Denny Hamlin. There's a reason why he rounds out the top 5 in odds. I will also pick a Hendrick Chevy. And like you said, I think we saw some really great things from Chase Elliott at Bowman Gray Stadium, but I'm going to go with the defending Daytona 500 champion. That's William Byron, who's rocking some awesome flames this week and trying to throw it back to a back-to-back Daytona 500 championships, which, by the way, would be the first time it would have happened since Denny Hamlin did it in 2019 and 2020. But William Byron just continues to, I feel like, be one of the under-the-radar names at these super speedways. He's never top 5 in odds. He's never even the highest, priced driver in any of the prop bets. You just look at his body of work with his first career win at Daytona back in 2020, and then obviously the win last year. William Byron's a guy that, again, we've talked about it in recent episodes. Last week we spoke about how mature that driver and that team and that pairing overall has become, and there's no better way to assert your dominance this season than by winning the Daytona 500. That's what they did last year, and well, they went to the championship 4. So I take a lot of stock into that 24 team and where they're at right now. For William Byron, he has the 2 wins, 3 top 5s overall, 4 top 10s at Daytona since debuting in the Cup Series. And for Denny Hamlin's purposes, 11 top 5s, 12 top 10s. So thinking about these 2 drivers, if you're looking outside the Ford camp, those would be my 2 favorites.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you on those. Denny Hamlin, I mean, his resume speaks for itself. Again, he's kind of up there in age now. There's a lot of things working against him on the NASCAR side of things with 2311 Racing and stuff just sponsorship-wise. So there's, I think, a little bit of a chip in his shoulder going into this one. The Hendrick stable is always going to be fast. I like William Byron. I like Chase Elliott. I like Alex Bowman quite a bit as well. Your runner-up from last year in the 500. Kyle Larson, yeah, he has his problems with these drafting tracks, but always going to be a factor no matter what on a weekly basis. But couldn't agree more on those picks. Denny Hamlin, one of the best in the business on these style tracks, and then William Byron. I mean, he's a great candidate to go back-to-back at Daytona for sure.
Well, sleepers here, Cole, because, favorites are the guys that tend to win these races almost every week. But at Daytona and any super speedway, you really feel like the winners a lot of the time tend to be those guys in the next 2 tiers that we get to here. And looking at some blue ovals deeper in the pack, looking at some former champions of this race and of this sport, a lot of interesting names as far as the sleepers category goes. So what do you like this week for sleepers?
Well, let me start off by saying this. I'm going to throw something out there real quick. So the last 8 races at Daytona, there has been a different winner. So my theme for this show is going to be all but one driver of my 6 is going to be a first-time winner at Daytona. Both for this sleepers category are in that same vein. The first one's going to be Bubba Wallace. Bubba Wallace, he is valued at plus $2,500 for the race win, $8,600 for DFS. He has been one of the best drivers, kind of silently, which is weird to say because he's so great on these style tracks at Daytona. He finished 5th in the 500 and 6th in the summer last year at this track. He is tied for the best next-gen average at Daytona at 9.3 with Kyle Busch. And let's not forget, he is still a 3-time runner-up at Daytona, twice in the Great American Race. And then just thinking back to 2 weeks ago now, at Bowman Gray. I know it's not a track that correlates again well with Daytona, but this was his first race paired up with new crew chief Charles Deneke, and he started 14th, rallied for a top 5 finish in a really, really competitive showing. So I think that's a great way to start things off with this new relationship. And I think just speaking on Bubba Wallace, the driver on these style tracks like Daytona and Talladega and now Atlanta, there's nothing that shows me to believe that he should not be a contender heavily for this win. And kind of like Brad Keselowski, he's a driver that will push it very hard, especially in the later stages of the race. So it's a matter of just pulling back the reins and playing your cards right. But I think he should be there at the end. I think Bubba's going to be a really sneaky sleeper pick for this win. And man, I think the racing world will go crazy if he would finally get into victory lane in the Great American Race. But I think he's another one of those guys up there with Ryan Blaney where I can kind of see there in victory lane when it's all said and done. Finally, their strength in numbers. I like going with a little bit of a pairing or teammates whenever I make my picks for the 500 because you need your drafting partners. And I think with that in mind, Chris Buescher is a great pick for the 500 to win his first one at that. He is plus 1,800 for the race win and $8,900 in daily fantasy. He won at Daytona back in 2023 in the summertime with his teammate Brad Keselowski pushing him for that win. He has also finished top 10 in 3 of his last 4 Daytona starts, including his most recent start this past summer. So another guy that's kind of very under the radar, I feel like, when we go to these drafting tracks. But he's made a name for himself. I mean, again, he got that win. He has his teammate, one of the best in the business, in Brad Keselowski, as help there, as an enforcer for getting up there and getting those quality finishes. So why not Chris Buescher? He's also won a race each season since the next-gen car has been introduced. So I think that's another big factor that works in his favor. He finished 4th in the 500 back in 2023, where he led 32 laps, second most to his teammate Brad Keselowski, and he has a best finish of 3rd in the Great American Race back in 2020. So a guy with a lot of success and a lot of good results on his side at Daytona. Give me that RFK pairing of Brad Keselowski and Chris Buescher for a really strong showing here in Daytona Beach, Florida.
I've got really, really high expectations for Chris Buescher this year. I said it in our preseason episode. If I had to pick one driver that I think is going to take a really big step forward, which, again, it's the guy that's run multiple races in a season in the next-gen era. I really, really feel that that team is going to take a huge leap this year, and I think that that's great advice. It could start with the Daytona 500 because, like you said, a Ford, strength in numbers, the experience, I really, really feel that that team and that driver is going to be forced all year long, and I think that starts absolutely this week with the 500. So for me, again, like you're talking about all these Fords. I didn't use any Fords in my favorites, but I'm going to use a Ford as my first sleeper because you're dead on with something. I feel like when you're predicting drivers that you think are going to run up front, you almost think of them in pairs. If you predict that Ryan Blaney's going to run up front or that Joey Logano's going to run up front, who's the pusher? Who's going to be in tandem with them? That would be Austin Cindric, the other number 2 for Roger Penske. I say it, I feel like every single time we go to Daytona and probably Talladega too. But listen, we were there. We saw him win. We've seen him win at this track. We've seen him win at the super speedways. He was the Daytona 500 champion, first race of 2022. Backed it up later that year by finishing 3rd. And he's a little bit due as well. He's a guy that he's had his fair share of success running up front, leading laps at Daytona. He's got the 2 top 5s, 2 top 10s. Average finish of 17th won't exactly display just how good he has been at Daytona and Talladega, but the numbers in this case kind of do lie because you look at him always running up front with Joey, with Ryan Blaney, with the other Fords. Austin Cindric is just a guy that knows his way around the super speedways. He will be there at the end, and he will have a chance to win this race. He's plus 2,000 for the race win, which actually puts him squarely between your 2 sleepers of Chris Buescher and Bubba Wallace. So thinking about the strength in numbers, thinking about how strong the Fords are, thinking about the fact this is a former winner in the Cup Series at Daytona in the 500. And listen, this is a big year too for Austin Cindric because that was certainly a great first impression, his rookie year in the Cup Series, but there has not been a lot of fortune that has gone his way since that point. The last 2 seasons have been disappointments for Austin Cindric. So I think that team and that driver knows exactly where they want to be. You think that Austin Cindric is watching his 2 teammates win the most recent championships and think to himself, why aren't we up there? Why are we not in that conversation perennially as well? And I think that there's nothing that we've seen the last 2 years that would lead you to believe Austin Cindric should be a guy that would contend for wins every week and would contend for a championship. But if there's one thing in his entire Cup career that's been constant, it's that he's run extremely well at the super speedways, and that is largely because of his teammates and how they just have this down to a science. So I love Austin Cindric this week. Love him at any super speedway. And I'm going to go with my first gut call of the week because, as you mentioned, you got to go with your gut. It's the super speedways. It's Daytona, Talladega. The numbers might not always back up what your gut says, but you got to go with it. And my gut this week, the first kind of intuition I have is that Ross Chastain is going to win the Daytona 500. And this is a driver that has been in the Cup Series going back to 2018. He's only had, out of 13 starts, 3 top 10s at Daytona. So I'm not going basically off of any numbers here. And I will say this, he did finish 12th in the 500, or at least 12th at the most recent Daytona race in August of last year. He finished 21st in the 500, but this is a guy that has been there. He's run a lot of laps. He's been able to avoid the big one, put it that way. So take away the average finish. Ross Chastain ran almost every single lap at the last 4 Daytona races. He's missed 1 lap, and it was in last year's Daytona 500, which, as you remember, the catastrophe that led to William Byron winning that race with the wreck that happened on the last lap. So outside of that 1 lap, the last 4 races at Daytona, Ross Chastain has run every single lap. And when I'm looking at who's going to win at Daytona, who's going to win in the 500, it is so much about who is going to keep the nose clean, who knows their way out of those sticky situations. That's why I chose Denny Hamlin. That's why I chose William Byron. Very smart racers that know how to navigate their way to the white flag. And I think Ross Chastain knows how to get to the white flag at Daytona. And we know he's going to be as aggressive as any driver in the sport. So, again, with him, not a ton of numbers to back this up, but the eye test and the fact that he's usually taking the white flag with a chance to win at these super speedways is something that sticks out to me. So I choose Ross Chastain, and I would choose Austin Cindric as my 2 sleepers.
I mean, they're 2 excellent calls. Austin Cindric, like you said, we saw it firsthand. We see it every time we go to Daytona or Talladega. He just knows how to navigate this draft so well. And again, the numbers, like you said, they do kind of lie because he's so skilled at that style of racing, but he gets taken out in these situations like most drivers do. And then Ross Chastain, hell, he won at Talladega once before. He's done it on a drafting style track, so it's definitely not out of the question. I think that your stat in saying he's completed all but 1 lap at Daytona the last 4 starts is really telling. It's nothing that many people would consider to look at, but it's something I've been thinking about going into this weekend for stories potentially. How do you weigh the risk versus the reward? The risk of winning your first 500 or a Daytona 500 and the reward of, staying in the points battle and being in contention as the season rolls on because, we got back-to-back drafting track races, Daytona and Atlanta. So it's like sometimes you got to weigh that risk versus reward, and some drivers like to play it smart, like Ross Chastain. So I think that's a really great call, really great step to bring into the fold. Love both calls by you, Ross Chastain and Austin Cindric.
Well, let's talk value picks here, Cole, because, we talk about how valuable these are every week, but especially at the super speedways. I mean, it wasn't long ago that a couple times last year and the prior year, our value picks have gone on to win these races, whether they're at Daytona or not. So there is a lot of money to be made here, especially in terms of some of the prop bets that we'll get to later on. But give me your favorite values of the week.
All right, I'm going to go with my first repeat Daytona winner over the last 8 starts. It's going to be the new driver of the number 71 at Spire Motorsports in Michael McDowell, your 2021 Daytona 500 champion, someone who has been just blistering fast on these speedways in the next-gen era. I say that in regards to poles, because last year he had 5 poles on drafting tracks, and for that, he led the most laps in the Cup Series on drafting tracks with over 130. With that also in mind, he was feet away, like Brad Keselowski, from winning the Talladega race in the spring. So he's a guy who's still very much competing at the top of his game, especially on the style tracks. And my only caveat is that he only has 1 top 10 at Daytona since that 500 win. But, I mean, I just mentioned right there all the reasons why you should pick Michael McDowell. The speed is definitely there. He is a lap-leading machine on these style tracks. He's going to be in contention, and I think he's looking to right ship after his debut with Spire in the Clash or the Last Chance qualifiers. He was not able to make it to the main, but this is a driver and a team with a chip on their shoulders, a brand new start there at Spire, looking to get things started off on the right foot as the veteran of that trio with Carson Hocevar and Justin Haley. And again, we talked about teammates earlier with Brad Keselowski and Chris Buescher. Justin Haley, Carson Hocevar, 2 young, very underrated speedway racers that can definitely pull together and make a run there late in the race and get a win at Daytona. I mean, Justin Haley, He's another winner at Daytona before in the past in the Cup Series. So it's not out of the question to see that Spire bunch, who's been, knocked down over the last few years in the Cup Series for not being too competitive, make a run and get that Daytona 500 win. So I like Michael McDowell a lot. Also want to keep in mind that he is still paired with Travis Peterson from Front Row Motorsports these last couple years. They have a great rapport together. I think that's going to go a long way, not just in Daytona, but for the rest of the season. So I like to see Michael McDowell get a top 10 day at a minimum at Daytona. He is plus 3,000 for the race win as a former 500 champion and $7,100 for daily fantasy. Now, we mentioned how numbers aren't always a great thing to go based off of for a track like Daytona or Talladega, but consistency is key when making bets for daily fantasy, for prop bets, and I think for Daytona, there's not much you can really pull together for a broad majority of the field, but there's one driver that I feel like you kind of can, and that's Zane Smith. Zane Smith rejoins Front Row Motorsports, this time in the Cup Series, driving the number 38 car. In his 3 Cup starts at Daytona, he has only finished 13th. So he's finished 13th in all 3 Cup starts at Daytona. That is as consistent as you could possibly get. I don't know what else I could say there. He's also a 2-time Daytona winner in the Truck Series, so a guy that you don't really think about maybe in the Cup Series when going to a track like Daytona, but the numbers speak for themselves. 3 straight 13th place finishes, 2 Daytona wins in the Truck Series. Why not? Why not Zane Smith? I think, again, there's a lot of excitement for me anyway on the front row side with Zane Smith, Todd Gilliland, and Noah Gragson, 3 really young, talented racers. 3 guys who have also proven to be really smart and efficient drivers on these drafting style tracks. So Zane Smith, I maybe not picking him for the win, but I think he's going to be good for definitely a top 10, top 15 day here in Daytona.
I'm going kind of like the opposite with you with my picks, because you're saying a lot of guys that haven't won at Daytona before. I'm picking a lot of former winners because I value experience a lot, especially in this race. And I just cannot end value picks without saying the name Ricky Stenhouse Jr. He's plus 3,000 for the win. He won this race, Daytona 500, 2 years ago, and he also won it in 2017 at Daytona, not the 500. But we say it every year with him. If you are a loyal listener to this podcast, we sound like a broken record, but he is either going to crash out or he is going to win. And as a matter of fact, looking at the last 6 races for Ricky Stenhouse Jr. at Daytona, he won that one, the 500 2 years ago. In the other 5 of those 6, he crashed out. And that's exactly the price to pay with a guy like Ricky Stenhouse Jr. You know what you're getting. You are getting high risk, high reward. And you know that if he doesn't win this race, he's probably not going to finish inside the top 20 or the top 30. In fact, hasn't finished inside the top 30 since he won the 500 over his last 3 trips to Daytona. So the potential is there. We know that. And we mentioned it 2 years ago. He was one of our value picks when he won the Daytona 500. And we'd be remiss to not mention him here at plus 3,000, along with some other names like Michael McDowell, who you mentioned. I think Michael McDowell, much safer bet. He's probably going to lead more laps. He's probably got a better shot at a top 5, top 10. But Ricky Stenhouse Jr. knows these restrictor plate or former restrictor plate, but super speedway tracks as well as anyone. He doesn't fall into that category of he knows how to keep the nose clean, but he certainly knows how to win at these races. So I can't end that segment without discussing Ricky Stenhouse Jr. With that, I will move on to our final pick out of the values this week. It's another guy that's plus 3,000 for the race win on BetMGM in his first race with his new team, Chase Briscoe. And looking at Chase Briscoe's Cup numbers at Daytona, finished 14th the last time they were there, finished 10th in the last Daytona 500. He's got a 3rd place finish under his belt as well in the 500 in 2022. So he's a guy that has known how to keep the nose clean at Daytona. And again, taking into account his allies, you've got guys like Denny Hamlin, Christopher Bell, Ty Gibbs. You've got the other Toyotas around him. There's four Toyotas in that stable. You've got the growing camp at 2311. I think that Chase Briscoe is going to be put in a position to succeed. I know it's a first race with a new driver and a new team and all of those variables that factor into that, but stranger things have happened. When we were just talking about how Austin Cindric won his first race of the 2022 season, and granted, that was as a rookie. Chase Briscoe is a grizzled veteran of this sport and somebody that is among the younger generation of veterans in the sport, but this is a huge opportunity for them to get off on the right foot and put any criticism to rest. They don't want to start the season and have to answer a lot of questions on why haven't they won a race yet? When is that monkey going to come off their back? I think that this is a driver and a team that I just believe a lot in, and I look at the drivers around that stable and the ability that they're going to have to run up front with the likes of those other Toyotas. And I feel strongly that Chase Briscoe is going to be due for a strong day. Again, probably a little bit more of a gut call because he is not a former winner at Daytona. But listen, he hasn't been in Joe Gibbs racing equipment in his entire career. So I think that's something I'm considering as well. So I'm going kind of all over the board with these picks, but you kind of have to at Daytona because that's the only way to make money. Well, let's talk about what we can put a little bit more money down on. We're going to talk about big money bets in just a second, which are our favorite prop bets of this week at Daytona. But first, we like to kind of narrow this field of 12 drivers down to 6 by each picking one per tier. So we'll pick our favorite sleeper, our favorite value pick, and our best favorite of the week. So for the favorites, Cola, I'm going to take Denny Hamlin. I will take Austin Cindric from the sleepers, and I'll take Ricky Stenhouse from the values. So I'll go 3 different manufacturers.
Very nice. And all 3 Daytona 500 champions. For me, I'm going to go with Ryan Blaney as my favorite. I just love what I've seen from this driver. Start this young season off, albeit in a exhibition fashion, but even going back to last year, he's just been red hot. I like Bubba Wallace for a sleeper. Just, again, a guy that's a 3-time runner-up in the 500, or a 3-time runner-up at Daytona, but 2 times in the 500, and just a really good plate racer. And then finally, I'm going to go with Michael McDowell for my value pick. Former 500 champion with a new team. As Billy Joel once said, get it right the first time. That's the main thing. And he wants to get things started off right in his first points race with Spire Motorsports. So give me Michael McDowell for that 500 win, number 2.
That is great advice. And as we kick off this big money bets segment, again, these are our favorite prop bets. We call them big money bets because traditionally you're able to throw a larger sum of money and feel pretty good about it, feel pretty safe and secure about it. This is not necessarily one of those weeks because it's Daytona. The big one's going to happen. Anything can happen. And obviously there aren't a lot of safe and secure bets this week. But with that being said, there are some that we're kind of keeping our eyes on. Before I turn it over to you, I would just say that, I always like to caution insurance bets, not big money bets, but insurance bets. If you're going to pick William Byron to win the Daytona 500, throw some money on him to also finish in the top 3, top 5, and top 10 because you're going to be really disappointed with yourself if it's a 3-wide finish and he finishes second by 4 1,000ths of a second. And to that same degree, you're going to be really pissed at yourself if he's leading coming off of turn 4 and falls out of the top 3, or if there's a wreck coming to the start-finish line and he finishes 7th. So I would just say my advice for big money bets this week, any week at a super speedway, any driver you're picking for the win, just throw an insurance bet on them for a top 5, top 3, top 10, whatever you're comfortable doing. With that being said, obviously, as you said, Cole, there are certain drivers that have a knack for the super speedways. They have a knack for clean and safe racing. They have a knack for the ability to finish top 10 and rack up points at these tracks. That being said, what are your favorite big money bets this week?
Yeah, I echo all of what you just said. I mean, so if you look at the insurance bets and how they work, the favorite per bet MGM is Ryan Blaney, Logano, and Keselowski. All 3 drivers, if you look at the top 3 props for their finisher bets, are above even payout at plus 360. Even for top 5, above even at plus 170 payout. So I think that's a great advice going into this one and for any drafting track like Daytona, like Talladega, like Atlanta. But outside of the insurance bets, some things that I feel like could be more of a sure thing with a, I guess, more of a forgivance if there is, they don't get the win. A top 10 props I like to look at a lot for the super speedways, just given the nature of these tracks and the payouts. I like Bubba Wallace quite a bit for a top 10 at plus 105, so just barely above even payout. Again, a guy that is a 3-time runner-up at Daytona. He has an average finish of 9.3 in 6 Daytona starts in the next-gen era. That one seems like a no-brainer to me. And then one more that I feel really good about with an above even payout is going to be Michael McDowell to finish top 10 at plus 120. Maybe not as confident as Bubba Wallace, just given McDowell's resume in the next gen at Daytona. Irregardless, he's still a 500 winner. He's still somebody who is an excellent, excellent drafting track racer. So those are the two that I would say with above even payouts that I feel most comfortable putting a larger sum of money on for a big money bet. But like you were saying, I think the insurance bets for your favorite are going to be key here. And I think my advice that I always like to give for betting Daytona and Talladega is have some fun with it. Don't go crazy betting 20 plus bucks on a race winner. Throw 10 bucks on 3 guys you think have a good shot at getting that win and just see where it goes from there. Maybe don't put insurance bets out there for all 3 of those drivers. Maybe pick 1 or 2. But I think having 3 horses in the race is always a good play. It's going to make things fun. The payout's going to be enough to where if one of those hits, you're going to come out well ahead. So I agree with your insurance bet policy for betting this weekend, and I also like the 3-horse approach for betting Daytona and Talladega going forward.
I want to start a new segment here because, as we talk for whatever this has been, a half hour, 40 minutes, sometimes there's some topics that go uncovered, loose change, if you will, going with the money theme. Some loose change that I think we have to kind of talk about are the 2 of the greatest drivers that motorsports have ever seen, and we haven't said their names yet this episode. Jimmie Johnson is plus 10,000 to win the Daytona 500. And then Helio Castroneves, we haven't mentioned, is going to attempt to make the Daytona 500 at plus 20,000. A little bit of loose change thoughts here. Putting you on the spot, what are your expectations for those 2 drivers this week?
Loose change thoughts. This one has some slight bias towards it, but Jimmie Johnson was just on SpeedFreaks' main show here this past Sunday. Prior to that, we had Ron Capps and Malcolm Stewart on for Supercross and NHRA. There is such thing as a SpeedFreaks mojo. Whenever a driver comes on the show, they go on to win the next week. And what do you know? Ron Capps won the Pro Skags shootout the following week. Malcolm Stewart won the 450 in Tampa that following week as well. So, I mean, Jimmie Johnson, he has had as rough a go as you can possibly have since joining Legacy Motor Club in that 84 team, as far as the on-track stuff has gone. And even as a team owner, I mean, Eric Jones and John Hunter Nemechek have not been the most flashy in terms of results since they've taken over. But you know what? Rolling with the SpeedFreaks mojo, why not throw a little bit on Jimmie Johnson to get that win? He's, plus 10,000 to get the win. So even if you throw like $2 on it, you're still coming out well ahead. He's a 2-time Daytona 500 champion, so you never count him out. It's still Daytona. Anything could happen. So why not? Helio Castroneves, that's a very interesting one for me because he's making his first ever Cup start. However, he's a multi-time Indy 500 winner. The racing style is very similar compared to the Brickyard to Daytona when talking IndyCar and NASCAR and that style of racing on the ovals in that series. So I think he's going to have a competitive run. I really do. He's driving for Trackhouse, the number 91 car, and we saw what SVG did in his first ever Cup start, going out and getting that win on the Chicago Street Course. So I don't know if I'm going to say that Helio Castroneves is going to win the Daytona 500 in his first start, but for someone of his pedigree and for someone who's already locked into the race with the new provisional rule, I think it's not out of the question, but I wouldn't probably put a lot of money for the race win. Maybe for a top 10, though, I'd be very intrigued to see how he does.
Yeah, listen, I'm not putting anything out there that, I think that there's going to be one result or another, but obviously it's a very high-risk situation, and that's why they're plus 10,000 odds or longer in the case of Helio Castroneves. And let me just say this about Jimmy. Like you said, he's a 7-time champion. He's, in my opinion, the greatest driver in NASCAR history. He's a 2-time Daytona 500 winner, and I just feel the luck has been so awful. And I know that it's been a rough go of it, as you said, but listen, the Daytona 500 2 years ago, 2023, he was running in the top 10 when there were 5 laps left, or whatever it was, 10 laps left before, and obviously a big one happened. But what I'm trying to get at here is that he kind of joined this next-gen car era at a tough time. He retired right when They rolled out the next-gen car. He sort of was earning his stripes over these last several years, becoming comfortable with the car and obviously a brand new team. And with every year of Legacy Motor Club, I think that there's probably expectation that things could improve. And with less of that at the forefront, with less of, operating the ownership side and just being able to be maybe a little bit more present behind the wheel and more comfortable in your equipment, I think those are all things I'm considering. And I look at Jimmy as plus 10,000. $5 wins you $500, or in the case of a top 10, he's plus 310, to where $5 will win you $20. I just respect the driver way too much to not sprinkle on that. So you have my word. I will be sprinkling on that for better or for worse, whatever bias is involved. Grew up a diehard Jimmy Johnson fan. I feel a need that there's going to be something to be said for Jimmy Johnson running in this Shaq-inspired paint scheme in the Daytona 500. I just feel it. That's one of my gut feels.
I like that a lot. I really do. I do think he's had a lot of really rotten luck in this next-gen car. Like, anything that could go wrong has gone wrong for Jimmy Johnson. But like you said, he was literally running top 10 in this race 2 years ago. So why not Jimmy Johnson? 7-time champion, 2-time Daytona 500 winner. Let it ride.
So fun. It's so fun to think about Daytona, where any driver can win. Literally any driver can win at Daytona Talladega, and that's part of what makes betting on it so fun as well. Let's talk some head-to-head driver matchups here, Cole. If there are any you like, I think these could be a little bit risky when it comes to betting on super speedways, but I'm just going to rattle off what they have offered on BetMGM. You've got Joey Logano against Denny Hamlin, Ryan Blaney against Chase Elliott, William Byron against Bubba Wallace, and you've got Kyle Larson versus Kyle Busch.
I do not like any of those. I do not advocate ever for head-to-head matchup props going into a Daytona or a Talladega. With the payouts so much in the bettor's favor for these tracks, I think it just pays more to, like I said, put some money down on a few race winners, put your insurance claims out there for the prop finishes, and just go from there. It's as simple as that, like the payouts for the head-to-heads, they're like right under even, minus 110, minus 115. It just doesn't do you any good to predict if two Daytona 500 champions, which one's going to come out ahead of the other in the case of Logano and Hamlin, or if someone like Chase Elliott's going to finish ahead of Ryan Blaney. Like, it's just no. That's my only advice.
Well, we've got some unfinished business too, and it will stay unfinished by the time this episode ends, because we've got to give you a recommended daily fantasy lineup. But again, full transparency, we're doing this episode a little bit earlier in the week to accommodate travel plans to Daytona for Cole. So we don't actually know right now what the daily fantasy values are going to be. And we will know that by the end of the week. Stay tuned to social media at @_MoneyStop, as we will have an idea of a daily fantasy lineup. And listen, it's Daytona. It's not going to be a DFS lineup where using every penny that you're allowed to in your budget is what wins you the week. You're going to have those guys like a Michael McDowell or a Austin Dillon, Josh Berry, Ryan Preece, I should say, that sneak into the top 10. Those are the guys that are going to kind of win you daily fantasy. And to be completely honest, in terms of the values that the drivers are priced at for Daytona and Talladega, there's not a lot of strategy in daily fantasy. You really just got to pick the 6 drivers, or depending on what platform you use, pick the 6 drivers you feel strongly about, because effectively, it's not like you're going to be picking Blaney and Logano and Brad Keselowski and Denny Hamlin. Effectively, you're going to be picking drivers that some of them are sleepers, maybe not all of them are favorites, but long story short, there's not as much to talk about anyway when it comes to daily fantasy at Daytona, unless there's a certain driver whose value we really like. But again, I don't think you're going to be fighting for a budget when you make your daily fantasy lineup. I don't know if you have anything to add to that.
No, it's honestly, it's all like we've been preaching the entire show. Go with your gut. Whoever you think is going to be in contention for that win come Sunday, just roll with that. And like you said, there's enough flexibility with these values for Daytona to where you can pretty much put anybody you want into that lineup, assuming it's not 6 favorites like your Brad Keselowski's, Joey Logano's, Ryan Blaney's, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So, I mean, just going off the numbers, which again, I know numbers aren't a huge deal for Daytona. I would say Zane Smith would be a really good one. I know, and again, values are not something you really take into consideration a whole lot when crafting lineups for Daytona, but three straight 3-0, 13th place finishes in the Cup Series at Daytona. I think that speaks volumes. And he's going to a good team that has already won before at Daytona in Front Row Motorsports with two really good and skilled teammates on these style tracks. I don't know how if you like Zane Smith, I think he'd be a really good back end to your lineup. Again, his value is $5,800. Not that you'll be stressing over values for this weekend, but I think he would be a really safe pick for a track where things are very much out of the driver's controls at Daytona.
Well, we've got one more line of unfinished business, and that would be our race winner and sleeper picks. We end every episode by, wrapping everything, putting a bow on it with, we talk about the trends and the strategy and everything that we've discussed. And we like to actually put our money where our mouth is and say, I think so-and-so is going to win the race. And I think that my sleeper for the win is going to win the race. And the criteria that we use is outside the top 15 in odds per Vegas. And we're going off the BetMGM Sportsbook right now. So without further ado, Cole, you're kind of the host. You're the guy that will be in person to watch the Daytona 500 and covering it for your various bylines, including SpeedFreaks and Kicking the Tires. With all that being said, why don't you lead us off here?
I said it from the top of the show during my favorites analysis. I'm going to go with YRB, Ryan Blaney. I've just kind of had this vision in my head since not too long after the Clash of him hoisting that trophy. I know that momentum's not really a factor when you're going back a full calendar year, but still, he's got 4 straight top 2 finishes. I think there is a fire lit under him and that team after coming just short of winning a second straight championship. And again, to start the year off in the Clash, albeit in exhibition fashion, coming up short and winning that first race to his buddy Chase Elliott. I like Ryan Blaney a lot this weekend. His resume speaks for itself on tracks like Daytona and Talladega. He's a winner here already, not in the 500, but he's also a 4-time drafting track winner, period. One of the best in the business. Give me Ryan Blaney for his first ever Daytona 500 victory this weekend.
He is one of the best in the business. I'm going to go with another one of the best in the business. And like you said, you got to catch a vibe. You got to go with your gut. It's Daytona. It's the 500. You got to get your feelings. And for whatever reason, I'm feeling the number ones this week. I really, really feel strongly about Ross Chastain and Denny Hamlin. I don't know why, but I feel an intuition about those two drivers. And I'm going to go with Denny Hamlin as my winner pick. A 3-time Daytona 500 winner. Why not? I mean, he is as good a bet as any Toyota in the field. And you're going 12, I'll go 11. And as we take turns where the person who picks their winner second picks their sleeper first, catching the vibe, why not? I'll go with my guy, Jimmy Johnson, as my sleeper this week. He is plus 10,000 for the race win. As you said before, why not 7-time? Why not Jimmy Johnson? I think every year that he is at the helm of Legacy Motor Club, there's going to be more comfortability and less pressure and more experience with this driver, this team, this equipment. And I love the idea of Jimmy Johnson running the Daytona 500 this week.
Very nice. I'm going to go with one of the guys that you mentioned. You mentioned Josh Berry, Ryan Preece. I had those two guys in my mind when I was kind of going through this outline and thinking of names that I kind of felt good about gut-wise. And I had both those drivers in mind, and I think mainly because both those drivers have had really nasty wrecks at Daytona or Talladega in the past couple years. And I was thinking it'd be such a cool story if one of these guys came out for their respective teams in RFK Racing and Wood Brothers and got their first Daytona 500 victory in a very underrated fashion. I think they're both two drivers really respected in the modified and grassroots racing world. I think Josh Berry had a lot of speed last year at Talladega before he had that nasty wreck. Ryan Preece, looking at his numbers here, he actually has the worst average finish in the next-gen era at Daytona. So that'd be a tough sell for me. But I think Ryan Preece would be my gut sleeper pick, only because he's racing for RFK Racing. We know what Brad Keselowski can do. We've seen Chris Buescher win here before in the next-gen era. So why not Ryan Preece? I know it's been a tough go as of late, but I think that'd be a really cool story if he can, rewrite the narrative and come out there and get a really quality day and even a Daytona 500 victory in his first points-paying start with that number 60 team at RFK.
You make a great point, too. Like, we're so high on the other RFK cars of Brad Keselowski and Chris Buescher. I mean, obviously, Ryan Preece is going to be in that fold, barring something catastrophic. So why not Ryan Preece? And we should also mention Josh Berry had a great run at the Clash in Winston-Salem. So something we didn't mention, but is definitely worth mentioning. And listen, it feels like the drivers we kind of gloss over, where I kind of combine their names together. Kind of feels like those are the guys that tend to take home the hardware sometimes. So it'll be a really fun race, really fun Speed Weeks. You will be there for it. It is the Daytona 500. As we enter Speed Week soon enough, there'll be cars on the track qualifying, practicing, duels, and then the green flag will drop on Sunday. Incredible, Cole. This is one of the best weekends of the year. I personally can't wait. Again, can't imagine what you're going through and your excitement, but this is truly one of my favorite times of the year.
It really is for me as well. Everything just seems amplified now at this point, being that I'll be flying out here in less than 24 hours. So just cannot wait to get down there. I think much Mountain Dew will be consumed, to say the least. And it's just going to be a great weekend. I'm so pumped up.
Well, it's going to be Sunday. It's going to be 2:36 Eastern Time sharp for the green flag, the Daytona 500 on Fox. Cannot wait. Thanks so much to everyone for tuning in, whether you're from SpeedFreaks, Kicking the Tires, the Money Stop, loyal listeners on social media at _Money Stop, whether you're on Apple, Spotify, whichever podcast platform you use. We thank you so much, and we hope that you can make it out of Daytona 500 weekend a little bit richer. So for Cole, I'm Steven. Thank you all so much for